This morning's lecture is about going for conditionality bad and executing conditionality bad on the affirmative is an objection to multiple conditional counterplans. And what I want to start off with is my deepest and gravest concern about how questions of counterplan status are currently taught. I have a concern that you have been taught lies, dirty, scandalous lies about one of my favorite concepts in debate, dispositionality. Dispositionality has regrettably acquired a number of haters over the year, and frankly, I don't know why, because I think that this is the best way for debates to operate and to function. Now, you might be asking, what is the definition of dispositionality? Some of my old lab leaders told me that dispositionality has multiple definitions and that no one agrees on what it means. False! Everyone knows what dispositionality means. Dispositionality means that you can kick the counterplan if the affirmative makes a permutation argument or a theory argument that is not about the status of the counterplan. Dispositionality means that the negative can kick the counterplan if the aff makes a permutation argument or a theory argument not about the status of the counterplan. How simple is that? Who's confused here? Who thinks that there are different definitions of dispositionality? What is the different definition of dispositionality?
I've heard people define dispositionality as like there being offense on that page.
Correct, and I've just defined the two examples of defense that you can kick. So I agree with that. That is the exact same thing as the articulation that I just gave.
Okay.
Solvency deficit arguments are offensive. The two defensive arguments that you can kick are permutations and theory arguments that are not about the status of the counterplan.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've always explained it as just perms or theory, like flat out. Is there a difference? Like, is there a reason to draw the distinction between theory arguments that are not about the status of the counterplan?
Well, you can't concede dispositionality bad like that. You would lose then. That is not a proper way to kick the counterplan. So, for a theory argument, not about the status of the counterplan, right? If the theory argument's about the status of the counterplan, you got to answer that. Sterling.
Some 8th grade kids said that if you ask the status, you can kick it, but I don't think that was like real. What would you do?
They define dispositionality as that, or they just said
I said, what's the status of the counterplan? He said it's dispo, but the condition was if you ask and cross.
Wait. If you cross-X the counterplane, you can kick the counterplane, or? Okay, that's made up. Completely made up. Not what this word means. This word has a very specific debate meaning, which is that you can kick the counterplan if the F makes a permutation or a theory argument not about the status of the counterplane. Okay, so I think that this is basically the greatest thing since sliced bread. And we have to start our question of going for conditionality bad with knowing our enemy. Our enemy are the cult of conditionalityites, the people who think that the negative can get away with everything under the sun, that think that they can read, 10, 12 multiple conditional counterplans with a bajillion planks and they can kick all of them and all that nonsense. Okay, so let's learn our enemy. What are the reasons why people think conditionality is good? Here's our Condo good block. What's happening there?
Neg flex.
Neg flex. Neg flex. Wow. Lot to unpack with neg flex. But the primary thing that I would like to emphasize when we talk about negative flexibility is that dispositionality results in the same level of negative flexibility that conditionality does. Yes, you should absolutely get to read multiple counterplans and critiques. Neg flex your heart out. But we should have the option to stick you with them. There should be a reciprocal cost to reading multiple conditional advocacies, especially ones that contradict with each other. And we'll talk and explain some of this stuff later, but the main thing I want to emphasize when we talk about negative flex is that dispositionality resolves negative flexibility because we have not placed a numerical limit on how many counterplans or critiques that you can read. So yes, go forth and conquer. Flex your neg. Counterplan out of our add-ons. Do what you want. But there's a strategic cost, potentially, to introducing a counterplan in the debate, which is that we could potentially stick you with it, especially if it is contradictory to another advocacy or to other materials that occur in the debate. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. The other thing, about this negative flexibility thing is uniqueness. This is a little weird, but if you think through the crux of debate history, we have now arrived at a world where people basically do not vote on conditionality bad. It is the norm and the meta of modern debate that the negative, by and large, gets to read as many counterplans as their heart's desire in the 1 and C. The neg basically gets to go more buck wild on conditionality in 2024 than at any point in the history of the activity of policy debate. And does the neg feel in that world, has the neg stopped complaining about life being hard? No. The neg is always complaining about not having enough flexibility, about life being really difficult for them, about having to debate all these new AFs. We have not fulfilled the promise of negative flexibility. Yeah.
Wait, isn't that unique? How does that uniqueness thing hurt the neg? In that if there's neg flex in the status quo, but conditionality, the AF interp is bad for that. Can the neg still leverage that?
It's a question of the relationship between this and the terminal impact claim, right? So it's does negative flexibility fulfill the sort of weakening of the gap, the competitive equity gap between the affirmative and the negative, right? Because the neg is basically forwarding the claim of life's hard out here for the neg because the topic is big, because the AF has structural advantages in the debate to be a speaking first and last and using permutations, and we need multiple conditional counterplans in order to put ourselves back in the game. Well, if that premise is not particularly true, it questions whether this has a terminal impact to it. Yeah.
How does topic, I suppose, topic bias play into this? Because this topic, at least based off the vibe I'm getting, seems especially bad. So how would that factor into the uniqueness question?
So the topic, I want to sort of caution the language of topic bad for neg and be a little bit more specific about what's happening, which is lots of topical affirmatives. Topic not particularly limited for the affirmative by the topic wording, right? So what is happening on this topic is not just life's hard out here for the neg, it's that there are a lot of potential topical affirmatives. And if one of our premises is the way that we create some sort of meaningful debates and functional limits, and we allow the neg to get, the sui generis counterplan or whatever, that's the way that we sort of figure out how to kind of make this topic a little bit manageable and smaller. Well, dispositionality is still able to do that, right? So insofar as functional limits are able to narrow down what we think, at least at this point in our topic research and our research in topicality and what the words in the resolution mean, that this is a particularly large topic in terms of affirmative ground, right? Okay, we need some functional limits to that, but we can have those functional limits under dispositionality. Okay, so that's neg flex. What are some other reasons why the conditionality cultists think it's good?
Argument innovation.
Argument, what is that?
It lets us improve our arguments because we can make a lot of them and then choose the best ones and improve upon them.
All right. A lot to unpack here with argument innovation, but the first thing I would like to impress upon you all is that we can innovate our arguments under dispositionality. What stops us from innovating and researching new counterplans? We need incentives to research new counterplans. Great! Dispositionality gives you all the incentives in the world to research new counterplans, and it means that you have to research better counterplans because the AF might read a DA to the counterplan, you might be stuck with it. You have to do better research on your new counterplan under dispositionality than conditionality. The other thread that I want to pull on here is, again, do you all really think that the modern era of conditionality is producing argumentative innovation incentives? Are we innovating? when, you know, a team reads their backfile consult NATO counterplan? No, we are regressing in argumentative innovation because the neg has incentives to read generic process counterplans that could apply to any topic that have weak solvency advocates because they can just kick out of it willy-nilly and there's no strategic cost to introducing that new counterplan, right? So think about all of the bad argumentative practices that you observe in debates, okay? Teams reading counterplan texts without solvency advocates. Teams uniqueness counterplanning out of their own DA. This happens all the time now, and I don't think that's innovative. Is that innovation? No, that is argumentative regression. We are creating worse counterplans under the world of unlimited conditionality than we would under the world of dispositionality. What else?
Testing? Oh, sorry, go first.
Testing? Something about testing?
I said info process.
Info processing. I don't know, what is that?
I'm honestly not sure.
Isn't it just like multiple options forces the app to make strategic choices?
Is that what it is? Yeah.
It's like kind of that, but like also like reading and then going through more arguments means you process more information, and that's good for like learning.
Okay, so we didn't call this that when I debated, but I think there are a couple threads that I understand here, which is like, we want to sort of 2AC strategic thinking is basically how this argument would be labeled in my blocks. And the idea here was, okay, conditionality makes life difficult for the 2AC. It creates certain strategic binds that the 2AC finds itself in as a result of multiple conditional options. And this argument, in some way, shape, or form, impact turns that argument. It says that it is good for the 2AC to have to be sort of careful about the set of answers that it produces to each counterplan. You know, there's another thread here, which is like hard debate is good. I think if this argument is labeled info processing, my initial reaction is like, okay, multiple dispositional counterplans also allows you to process information, right? In the same way that multiple conditional counterplans does. If the argument is, okay, the 2AC, they're in these strategic binds and they have to think really hard to get out of those strategic binds, well, now we've finally gotten to an argument that dispositionality might not solve. The problem is this is the argument that we're impact turning ultimately, which is that actually this is kind of horrible for debate and makes debate largely impossible for the affirmative and puts the 2AC in so much strategic pressure and in such a strategic bind that it makes debate rather easy for the negative if the negative were to consistently take advantage of the strategic bind. Hard debate is good, okay. Well, and I talked about this with our lab yesterday, which is like, hard debate, sure, conditionality makes the debate a little bit harder for the affirmative. Maybe dispositionality makes debate a little bit harder for the negative. Which one of these is better than the other is the question that we're trying to resolve, right? So hard debate is good for whom is sort of the question that we would ask a little bit here. And then it's also, it's not just a question of hard debate, but a question of the competitive equity of debate broadly, right? Is conditionality producing, fair debates, more educational debates? That's ultimately the question here. And so not just a question about the difficulty of the individual debates. Other conditionality good reasons. What else is in your blocks? Yeah.
Logic.
What's logic?
Like, it's illogical to force the neg to defend a less desirable counterplan as opposed to a better one of the squo.
Yeah. So logic says that in any decision-making process, the decision maker ought to have the capacity to choose doing nothing, right? If you said, I would like to create a forced choice between, going to McDonald's and going to Arby's, I would say, I hate fast food. I am going to neither. I will do nothing, right? That is logical. Logical, we should always retain the capacity for the status quo. To reject any advocacy, there should always be that option for the judge or for the debaters at the end of the debate. I think that the thing about logic, and the thing about the way we're explaining logic and the way that judges think about this stuff is, in debate, we are not creating a real-world decision-making situation. We are playing a competitive advocacy game, okay? And the job of the negative team is to prove that the app is a bad idea by presenting direct or opportunity costs to the affirmative. When they present advocacies, they change the debate. They change what's happening in the debate and change the way that the affirmative is responding to things. And so is it more logical to allow them to pick those arguments at any time? Or is it more logical, right, to create a situation where the affirmative can make strategic choices that can stick the negative with their advocacy? They've introduced an advocacy. Counterplans change uniqueness, okay? Not just counterplans that are labeled uniqueness counterplans, all counterplans change uniqueness. That's what they do, that's what their function is. They change the status quo. So a counterplan changes the uniqueness world that the affirmative is debating against. This is true of picks, this is true of process counterplans, this is true of advantage counterplans, or things that we typically label as uniqueness counterplans. They all change the uniqueness world that the affirmative has to debate against. And in some ways, in a lot of ways, debating multiple contradictory advocacies is illogical, right? Is it logical that, for example, the negative could read, against the Injunctions Act, counterplan, only pharmaceutical patents should get injunctions. And then in the same 1 and C, they could read, counterplan, all patents except pharmaceutical patents should get injunctions. They can read both of those counterplans in the 1 and C under the model of conditionality, right? And there's no strategic cost to doing so. That is illogical. That's not logical at all. What else? Yeah.
Multiple thing?
Yeah. So like, this is like, sometimes this will be called like ideological flex, or like, people will say this is real world or something like that. But the idea is that if we're defending advocacies, which is what the app is doing, right, when they're presenting their affirmative, they should defend those advocacies and answer those advocacies from criticisms or objections to those advocacies that come from both the ideological left, right, in the sense of like critiques, as well as from the ideological right in the sense of like they have to answer the econ DA or answer, various objections from sort of conservative sides. So we should answer both, kind of politically liberal, politically conservative objections to our individual policies, because that produces the best policy options ultimately, and creates a real world decision-making process or what have you. Similar issues, like debate is a competitive advocacy game. It's not the real world. We're not debating in Congress, right? We are an affirmative team debating a negative team. And sometimes, you can have, again, under dispositionality, you can read critiques and you can read disads that might come from conservative angles. So there's the possibility to have ideological flexibility, or to have, debate multiple argumentative angles under the world of dispositionality. But if those angles are directly contradictory, the app has the possibility of conceding one advocacy to stick the neg with that advocacy, or conceding one position to stick the neg with the other. Yeah.
What happens like under dispo if the neg reads two contradictory positions and the app sticks them with both of them?
Well, the debate plays out. Is the app better than the world of both contradictory advocacies? Probably. And so the app likely wins. And And the dispositionality advocate would say that that is a good outcome, right? It is bad and illogical to read multiple contradictory advocacies in the 1 and C. In the world where the neg is stuck with both and they lose, that is their rightful punishment for making a muck and a mess of our great activity. Other conditionality good arguments?
Negation theory?
What's that?
It's like the negative has to prove like a unique opportunity cost to the plan. Yeah.
Negation theory, I would say this is pretty related to this one, right? These are pretty similar. So negation theory is just, our job as the negative is to prove that there's a cost to the app, right? We just have to prove that the app is a bad idea. That's all we have to do. That's our job, our one job and our only job. So we can read multiple contradictory advocacies because they all say the app is bad, or they all say that the app is undesirable, right? So therefore it's totally fine for the neg to read multiple conditional options. Well, there's not an issue with the concept of negation theory. The issue is that the version of negation theory produced by unbounded conditionality produces illogical worlds where the negative gets to read multiple contradictory advocacies, gets to contradict themselves in the 1 and C, right? So again, it's like, yeah, your role is to disprove the affirmative, but you should do so in ways that are logically and internally consistent, because the affirmative should be able to exploit internal contradictions in your strategy. We exhausted the Condo good block. Anyone got any more? Yep.
I don't know if this is the reason Condo is good, but I know BK was saying like he thinks the Condo is not a voting issue because the result, like in his opinion, you should just stick the neg with like all the worlds they read in the 2NR. So if they're like, don't vote on it, and instead just like make the 2NR every single off case we eventually introduce, like what's the response?
Okay, so this is like ArgNet team, So, okay, so the argument is the remedy for winning the theoretical objection to conditionality ought not be to vote the affirmative team down on theory, but it ought be to stick the negative with every piece of, with every advocacy that they read in the 1 and C, say like all those things are dispositional. Why is that an insufficient remedy for the harms of conditionality? Well, quite simply, our argument about the harm of conditionality is about what happened to the 2AC. The 2AC was put in a strategic bind. It could not read its best offense. It could not exploit contradictions in 1 and C strategy. We have made a theoretical argument about the practice of conditionality being bad. If we had the debate where all the counterplans were dispositional, that would be a really different debate than the one that we actually had. So, this remedy forces the AF to win the debate twice. They have to win the theoretical objection to conditionality, and then they also have to win that the counterplans now being dispositional, right, which the AF can't win, basically like until the 2AR happens. They now have to win that all the counterplans being dispositional means they win the debate. That is an enormous burden on the affirmative, which is, again, totally illogical. Because if conditionality made the 2AC impossible, then there's no, like, sticking the neg with the counterplans doesn't solve that offense. The remedy does not resolve the harm. It is insufficient to provide a deterrent to the practice of reading conditional counterplans. It is insufficient to punish the negative team for reading multiple contradictory counterplans in this debate. Anything else? All right. We know thine enemy. We know what the conditionality cultists are going to introduce in the debate, what they're going to read in their evil 2 and C blocks, and we know how we're going to answer all of these things, right? Good. Okay. So, all right. let's get to why we should prefer the model of dispositionality over the model of conditionality. So, in debates that you all have had, what sorts of objections have you made to the practice of reading counterplans conditionally? Eli.
Conditionality is a voting issue for argument responsibility. It denies the 2AC its best offense by proving technical drops or
One at a time. One at a time. Which one do you want?
Argument responsibility.
Argumentative irresponsibility. What does that mean?
It means that the neg can just spend whatever stupid ass kind of funds they want without any consequences or costs to having them in the YNC.
Absolutely. There is no reciprocal strategic cost to reading multiple conditional counterplans. I think that this is the part of the debate where you might talk about some of the excesses of conditionality. The scourge of process counterplans, of uniqueness counterplanning out of your own DA, of counterplan text with no solvency advocates, right? The worst forms of conditionality that we have seen, these are all examples of argumentative irresponsibility, right? And you might say, like, look, okay, like you have a problem with some of these counterplans. You should beat those counterplans on theory arguments about the counterplan. This is not a question of the status of the counterplan. I hear you on that they should lose to theory arguments about the counterplan, but the incentive structure that makes these counterplans so common is the incentive structure of conditionality, right? The fact that 2As these days seem unwilling to press the question, the theoretical question of conditionality, allows the neg to get away with largely anything in a way that is irresponsible. They can contradict themselves, read counterplans without text. There's no cost to introducing new counterplans. Therefore, they get to be vastly irresponsible in how they introduce arguments. I think that this is a very real objection to the practice of reading arguments conditionally. I don't think it is our best objection, but I think this is a very real one we should make in the debate, and then one that we should explain. What are others? Yeah.
Strat skew,
What's that?
like, the idea that app is unable to, like, the decisions the app can make in response to, like, I suppose, putting a term on enough benefit such any offense really can go away just because the neg, like, decides to go for the worst counterplan equals the app, like, doesn't have decision-making capabilities in the 2AC.
So, okay, so what is 2AC strategy skew? What does it mean? What sort of situations are we talking about? So yeah, so we're saying that the practice of reading multiple conditional counterplans puts the affirmative in a strategic bind. It puts the 2AC in a strategic bind to where they are not able to make their best answers, to where they are not able to exploit contradictions in negative strategy. So, when does this occur? Okay? Well, there are, the classic situation that people talk about are, where you have directly sort of ideologically contradictory advocacies in the 1NC. So you've got the critique of capitalism, and then you've also got the sort of free market, let the market run free, laissez-faire capitalism counterplan. And in that world, it is hard for the affirmative to generate responses on one that do not hurt them on the other, right? So every, argument that they're making as a response to one position is ultimately hurting them on the other position in a way that puts the 2AC in a difficult strategic bind. This can also happen in worlds where, so for example, think about how straight turns work in the context of disadvantages. Okay, so let's take the court clog DA, right? So like straight turn DA is clog now, or sorry, not clog now. Link, F causes clog, clog bad. That's our DA, right? So the app has two options in terms of turning the DA, right? They can link turn. They can say clog now, F unclog. They can impact turn, right? They can say clog good. But they can't do both, because doing both would be a straight turn. Clog now, F unclog, clog good. Can't do that. That is a straight turn, and the negative could concede both, right? They could concede non-unique, link turn, and impact turn, and they would stick the, they would now have an advantage, right? That would be a rough situation for the affirmative in this world where they double turn themselves, okay? So, what happens when advocacies get introduced, okay? How do advocacies change this, okay? So, you know, think about what some affirmatives might say, okay? They say, okay, we would like to have innovation. So they'll say, you know, innovation, low now, patents equal innovation, innovation good. Simple enough. Okay. So counterplans, again, counterplans change uniqueness worlds. Okay? And so sometimes a counterplan can create something that looks a little bit like a link term, right? So CP. Ban patents. Patents bad for innovation. Right, we've all encountered this argument here, okay? That's in essence kind of like a link turn to the advantage, right? The advantage, uniqueness, innovation low now, patents are good for innovation. The counterplan generates uniqueness for the turn vis-a-vis banning patents and then says that patents are bad for innovation. Okay, and then let's say that the neg also in this 1 and C on case said innovation bad. In a just world, the affirmative should be able to concede all of these premises and should be able to win the debate based off of the complete and total mess that the negative has made in this debate. They've double turned themselves, right? They've said ban patents, patents bad for innovation because innovation is good, and then they've also said innovation is bad. But because there are advocacies involved, in the world of unlimited conditionality, they just kick the counterplan and who cares? Yeah.
Wait, how does kicking the counterplan get them out of it if the app concedes that patents are bad for innovation and that innovation is bad? Because the patents bad for innovation part is like
there's no
claim,
uniqueness. There are patents in the SQO and patents are not banned.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Makes sense.
There's no longer uniqueness for the double turn in the world where the counterplan's gone.
Mm.
Because counterplan is the thing that generates uniqueness for this. So, this is 2AC strategy skew, okay? What are we talking about when we talk about 2AC strategy skew? It is these situations where the affirmative uses advocacies to, in essence, literally contradict themselves, to double turn themselves, okay? So a few examples of this that we've given. So one are the examples where there are ideologically contradictory positions. So the capitalism bad critique, the free market good counterplan, the use the advocacy to generate uniqueness for a link turn and then impact turn it on the case, right? And then the other situation we've talked about is the, counterplan only give injunctions to pharmaceutical patents, along with the same 1 and C reading the counterplan of, do not give injunctions to pharmaceutical patents, give it to all other patent categories, because, we don't want to give them to the pharmaceutical patent industry, right? These are worlds where the affirmative is put in a strategic bind in terms of how they are answering those arguments in terms of what the 2AC are saying, right? So this concretely is 2AC strategy skew. These are also in some ways some examples of negative argumentative responsibility, right? So that is strategy skew. That is our problem with conditionality, okay? So I think that 2AC strategy skew is like our top line response to conditionality good. I think that's our best argument about why the process of reading counterplans conditionally is completely intellectually bankrupt, and it is completely solved by dispositionality. Dispositionality is a clear remedy to 2AC strategy skew because you can stick the neg with their advocacies if you so choose, if you do not make a permutation or a theory argument not about status. Okay, now there are also some other things that people will say in their conditionality bad blocks, and I think they're quite a bit worse than these arguments, but we should give some airtime to them. So what are some other things you've seen? Yeah.
Time skew.
Time skew, yeah, time skew. Time skew, simply that debate becomes particularly difficult for the affirmative when advocacies are involved. Advocacies create unique time pressures on the 2AC because you have to make all these like solvency deficit arguments, and you got to make permutations, you need to make some theory arguments, try to find some offense on the counterplan, so you got to do all that jazz. It's different from debating DAs. It creates a lot of time pressure on the 2AC. Now, the objection to time skew that you will hear a lot is, well, a lot of what the neg does skews the time of the 2AC. Reading a bunch of disadvantages, topicality arguments, or what have you, or a bunch of case turns, that skews the time of the 2AC. Additionally, dispositionality probably doesn't solve time skew. Like, you're still going to have to spend a lot of time answering some counterplans in a world of dispositionality. So this one's a lot worse than strategy skew. There are some people who sometimes will just kind of confuse the difference between these two things. You want to preserve the difference between these two. Strategy skew, that's your good argument. That's your good offense against conditionality. Time skew is your less good offense against conditionality. Other things that go in Condo bad blocks. Yeah.
I've seen like research arguments, like if they can kick out of offense, there's no incentive to cut the cards for that offense before.
Okay, so research incentives, meaning like the AF should have the incentive to research offense versus the counterplan. Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I think this is in some ways like maybe an impact. This is maybe an impact to strategy skew than its own standard, but I think that's a totally reasonable thing, which is the practice of reading counterplans conditionally means that there are strategic options that are kind of off the table for the affirmative, where they're probably not looking for DAs to the counterplan or ways to exploit contradiction because the neg can just kick their counterplan. Other things that the negs, the AF says sometimes in these debates. All right, so I want to talk a little bit more about dispositionality and some of its detractors. So we've talked a little bit about, some people think that there's definitional ambiguity of dispositionality and that it's got an arbitrary definition. And I think we have firmly defeated that argument because it is simply not true. Everyone knows what it means. Everyone knows what it means. It means that you can kick the counterplan if there's a permutation or a theory argument not about status. So, some other things that people will say about dispositionality, they will say that in a world of dispositionality, the mean negative can force the affirmative to make a permutation argument because they can add fake planks and read some advantages to those fake planks. Like they could say, our counterplan is ban patents, and then also, cure world hunger in Africa or something like that. And you need to perm the world hunger plank, otherwise you're gonna lose the debate, because they're gonna have an advantage to that plank. This is nonsense. Why? Because a smart affirmative team perms that plank of the counterplan and straight turns the other plank. So no, there is nothing that the negative can do to force a permutation argument, no more than the negative can force the AF to make an impact defense argument about a DA. What is this nonsense? You cannot force a perm on a counterplan. You can read additional planks that we would permute and allow you to kick those planks, but there's nothing that the negative team can do to force permutations. Yes?
If it's not an additional plank, but just something ban patents and cure world hunger or whatever, does that mean you can link the app? Does the forcing plank perms things work now?
You can still perm that portion of the counterplan because you can perm part of the counterplan. Additionally, it's if you think about it, every counterplan that is planked, you could and or you could semicolon between and it would read the same. And so functionally, I think that and, or if there's an additional clause of the counterplan, that is a plank. And so, yeah, you would just perm that part of the counterplan in that way. So it still does not force a perm. Yeah.
Sorry, just clarifying. So if the negative reads like a multi-plank counterplan, the dispo argument would be that the negative can only kick the planks of the counterplan that the AF permutes.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Because in a sense, planks are like multiple counterplans.
Okay.
In dispositionality, we're treating them like multiple counterplans, right? So that you can kick the counterplan, the plank of the counterplan that was permuted, the planks that are not permuted, you are stuck with.
Okay.
Because there's no perm or theory argument about them. Okay, so that is forcing perms. Other thing, sometimes people will say dispositionality devolves into conditionality. I've never really understood why they think that, because that's not true. Dispositionality is a separate thing, it's a separate word. It allows the affirmative, and again, if you've got some of these concrete strategy skew examples, this helps you here too, because you can give examples of situations where the affirmative would stick the negative team with counterplans, right? So if you've got concrete examples, you can prove the dispositionality never devolves back into conditionality or is conditionality by other names. So I think those are, yeah.
Some people say it devolves into no condo.
Ooh, devolves into unconditionality. Okay. Dispositionality does not devolve into unconditionality. Similar reasons. Well, the neg can still read, they can still read counterplans, and those counterplans often can be kicked, right? When the AF, and look, a usual 2AC to a counterplan makes a perm and a theory argument. It would be an extraordinary situation where the 2AC would not make a perm or a theory argument. They would be doing it for very strategic reasons, which is because probably the neg made a confusing mess of the debate, and the AF is going to strategically point that out with some strategic concessions, right? So in most in most counterplan debates under the model of dispositionality, the neg's going to be able to kick the counterplan at some point, which is very different from the world of unconditionality, right? So dispositionality still includes a world where the neg can kick their counterplan when there's a perm or theory argument, which is frankly going to be pretty often, right? So it does not devolve into unconditionality. And the other reason is you can read multiple counterplans under dispositionality, right? So it's you can read you can read your advantage counterplan and your state's counterplan, they would be weird if combined together, but they're not contradictory, right? So there's not a concession that could happen. So under the world of dispositionality, there's still a world where the 1 and C introduces multiple counterplans, which under the world of unconditionality would make no sense. Yeah.
So do you think that fact that AF teams would need perms in theory to respond to process counterplans and picks and stuff, is that a reason why dispo still preserves some neg offense, or why dispo would not solve some of the argument for irresponsibility stuff?
Okay, so in the world where we're answering process counterplans, we need theory, we need competition to answer them. So those counterplans are examples where even in a world of dispositionality, the AF needs to make those arguments. Is that where it is?
Yeah.
So I would say that for those counterplans, it's like, if they are not producing the strategic bind, right? Are they not contradictory? Are they not producing this like double turn yourself situation? Then I think you're saying that's not an example of argumentative irresponsibility. So like, yes, we should prosecute those counterplans through competition and through theory arguments about the counterplans. And so it's like, the thing is, it's you know, the argument about argumentative irresponsibility is not all process counterplans are totally bad. It's that the proliferation of multiple, you know, process counterplans that are all competing off of similar words in the same 1 and C, like that's irresponsible, that's bad. But one process counterplan alone, you wouldn't say that that's bad. So I think that's the line I would walk in terms of preserving. Do we solve argumentative irresponsibility in situations where there are counterplans that you probably do want to make theory and terms to kind of debate and beat the counterplan?
Sorry, but why does dispo, I suppose, not just lead to like a bunch of counterplans all competing about the same word? Like, is there anything inherently that prevents that from happening?
Well, I mean, it depends. It depends on the definition. If they're all competing off of, you know, certainty and immediacy definitions of should, I suppose that's fine. If they're competing off of different definitions of the same word, potentially that could be exploited as a contradiction, right? So again, it's like the objection here is not about process counterplans or counterplans that compete off of should. It's about counterplans that are contradictory in nature, counterplans that put the 2AC in a unique strategic bind. That's what your 2AC strategy skew offense is primarily about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good. Sterling.
I guess, like, my question is, like, do you think that conditionality bad becomes more persuasive in instances where, let's say the neg read a court clog disadvantage and, like, farm bill, and they read on both counterplans out of both of them in the 1 and C, like, preemptively? Do you think that becomes more persuasive to the judge in that instance?
Yes, absolutely. This irritates me beyond no ends. Counterplaning out of your own DA, please. Oh my God. Counterplaning out of your own DA, I think, is very much an example of the excesses of conditionality. It's very much an example of argumentative irresponsibility. I despise the practice largely, so yes, I do think conditionality bad becomes more persuasive in the world where you are debating multiple uniqueness counterplans out of multiple DAs. Absolutely, you should say that is bunk, garbage, nonsense debating, and should be rejected.
What about, like, if they double counterplan out of the impact turn and link turn? Like, for elections decide, bar Trump from running and have, I guess Biden already stepped down, but like, and bar Biden from running, like, to get out of the impact turn as well. That's gross and disgusting. Obviously you say that's gross and disgusting, and a horrible example of advocacy, right? Like, what logic skills are we teaching? Are we really teaching logic and learning by virtue of having multiple counterplans out of different impact turns to an elections DA? Like, no, that's horrible. Horrible for debate. Yeah. Okay, one more example. What if they did all that stuff with the court clog and the farm bill, but then they also read patents bad for innovation and innovation bad on the cap K?
Again, yeah, like these are all things you should say are horrible examples of conditionality. I am with you that these are the excesses of conditionality. These are reasons it's bad. Yeah.
I guess this isn't like germane to like strat skew, but like the argument it's like diminishing marginal utility, like more stuff.
Yeah, this is pretty common. So sometimes defenders of conditionality will say that unlimited conditionality or models of conditionality where the neg can read many conditional options are really not that bad because there's ultimately diminishing utility to the fifth counterplan that you read, right? So if you've already read like a process counterplan competing off should, your like third process counterplan competing off should has the same set of 2AC responses, so therefore it doesn't really skew the 2AC that much when they read an additional counterplan. That's the diminishing utility argument. The answer to the diminishing utility argument is, our objection is not about the number of advocacies in the 1NC, okay? We will grant you the premise that the fifth counterplan you read is worse than the first or second counterplan that you read. Agreed. That's not our beef. Not our beef. Our beef is skewing the 2AC's strategy, okay? Our beef is this strategic bind situation. That is our problem with the practice of reading counterplans conditionally. It's not a problem, it's not a beef with the number of the counterplans in the 1NC. Like if you can form a dispositional counterplan 1NC with like 9 conditional counterplans that are all internally consistent, God bless. Flex your heart out. Seriously. We do not have beef with number. That's not our argument. Our argument is about skewing the 2AC's strategy. It's about strategic binds. So it's not about number, it's about strategy. Yeah.
So, do you kind of feel like it's only like a viable AR when there's like this sort of strat skew abuse in the round?
No, because conditionality is about the model, or conditionality debates are about the model of debate, right? So if you have one that their model of debate is bad because it justifies the strategic bind, you still win. So no, I do not think you have to have in-round abuse to win conditionality bad. You have to win the argument that their model leads to that and your model solves it, but you don't have to win it literally happened in this debate to win the debate. But yeah, good question.
Earlier you said like 2 counterplans that don't necessarily contradict. You like could stick neg with them, but it wouldn't be like as strategic. If they have different like net benefits, wouldn't it still be strategic? Because like one counterplan would link to net benefit and one doesn't. Looks like it.
Oh well, that I mean, link to the net benefit that's a different question, because like then that's a situation where, yeah, you would want to stick them with it,
So
but
does
it's
that
like
count as like contradictory if it has like different net benefits?
well, if the combination would link to both, then maybe, right? So if like advantage counterplan plus states counterplan links, you know, to I don't know, to politics and to something else, whatever the like substantive, you know, net benefit to the advantage counterplan was, like maybe that's a situation where it's, you know, it's not like contradictory in the sense that they're, you know, saying the opposite or like creating this double turn situation, but they're, you know, if the combination would link to the net benefit, then in the world of dispositionality, yeah, they would not be, you know, sticking them with both would be a tough life for the negative team. Yeah.
Sorry, this is like a weird question, but like if you stick the negative with 2 counterplans, is the 2NR defending a world where both of those counterplans are implemented?
Yes.
Or are they defending like 2 worlds where like one counterplan's implemented and the other?
I think it only makes sense that in that circumstance, the neg is defending the world of both counterplans combined.
Okay.
It does, like the 2 worlds thing would be, well, it would be weird. It wouldn't make sense with the logic of dispositionality, which is that you're stuck with the counterplan. So I think they're combined in that world. Yeah.
What does that mean for, I suppose not necessarily contradictory, but like counterplans that when combined are like just illogical. Like if you're like ban IP and then also have the courts do the plan, like how would that function?
It probably functions as the neg losing that debate. like to be brutally honest, that just probably means the neg loses. So it's like the model of dispositionality means you have to be careful about what goes in the 1NC. Yeah.
What happens when it's like they read a K in a counterplan and you stick them both to it, but obviously the counterplan would like link to the K?
Okay, so does the counterplan link to the K more than the AF?
I mean, that's probably a debate to be had, but.
Well, that's the debate that has to be had, right? So if the neg has to decide what piece of offense they want to go for. They have to say that it links to the AF a lot more than it links to the counterplan. And you have a debate about links to net benefit. Like that's in essence what happens there. Yeah.
I guess it's a very similar question. Like, what if you stick them with two counterplans that are like literally mutually exclusive?
Again, I think that's a situation where the neg loses.
Okay.
Like the AF is going to win if
Like double check.
they are literally mutually exclusive. That was the 2AC strategy skew. We stuck them with both of them. We now win.
So then, how do we answer the argument that's just like dispo like functionally results in like one condo because if the neg reads two advocacies, they just get stuck to both of them and lose?
Well, you can read two counterplans that have similar net benefits. Like if you can read an advantage counterplan that, for example, like doesn't link to politics, and you also have your states counterplan that doesn't link to politics. The combination of states counterplan and advantage counterplan also doesn't link to politics, right? So the answer is just that the neg has to be judicious about what it puts in the 1 and C, what its net benefits of those counterplanes are. Like they have to think through some of these concerns, certainly, but it does not mean that they are left with only one counterplan. They can read multiple counterplans. They should be careful about net benefits.
In a world of dispo, if like the counterplans extended into 2 and R, suppose the 1 AR, like the 2AC had a parent, but the 1 AR didn't, can the neg kick it with the 2 and R?
This is weird. I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say if I'm judging the 2AC had a permutation, it was, the neg extended the counterplan, they answered it, they answered the perm. The 1AR did not extend the permutation, so the permutation in my eyes is no longer part of the debate. So I'm going to say 2 and R does not get to ad hoc concede the permutation that they answered in the 2 and C. That would be, yeah. If the 1AR does not extend the perm, I'm going to say 2 and R does not get to kick the counterplan. I will say, maybe this is such a weird situation that maybe different coaches and judges would have different answers, but I'm going to say you're stuck with it. Okay, so everyone can go to lab. We're a little 5 minutes over, but should be fine. Thank you all for coming by.